In the last video, we looked at the functions and tissue layers of the series of blood vessels, arteries and veins, arterioles, venules, and capillaries that run through our body. In this video, we'll focus on the other main component of the cardiovascular system, which is, of course, our heart. And the heart is basically a muscular pump, actually two pumps, that is about the size of your fist. So to me, that actually seems fairly small when I think about the heart and its massive importance to the functioning of the body. And then I sit here and make a fist, which I realize you can't see me right now, but I am doing it, and I hope that you are too. That seems relatively small for the function that it performs. And that muscular pump gets most of its work out of any other muscle in your body. It beats about 72 times per minute on average, and hopefully doesn't stop. And that 72 beats per minute pumps about 5 liters of blood in that time. So in 1 minute, we're pumping about 5 liters of blood through our heart. From the outside, like if you were to be looking at a full and complete heart from the outside, it looks like one single structure. But if you were to cut it open and look at what's inside, it's actually divided into 2 halves. And each of those halves operates as its own separate pump that are separated by a layer of tissue called the septum. And each half has an upper chamber called an atrium. So we'll have a right atrium and a left atrium. And each half also has a lower chamber called a ventricle. So we'll have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. The atria, or the atrium of each half, is the receiving chamber for blood. So blood that is entering the heart or entering each of the pumps is going to enter through the atrium. And the lower chamber, the ventricle, is the actual pumping part, the part that's going to use that cardiac muscle to propel the blood out of the chamber. And that is why the ventricles are so much larger than the atria, because they are the actual pump part that's going to be doing really all of the work that the heart performs. So we've got the 2 chambers, each with an atrium and a ventricle, separated by the tissue layer of the septum. And the heart operates in those 2 separate pumps, and each pump is considered its own circuit. So one of them is going to be the pulmonary circuit, pulm meaning lung, so sending blood to the lungs. And then the other one is going to be the systemic circuit, sending blood to the systems of the body, out into the tissues. So out through the arteries and down into the rest of the body. We are going to look at those each individually. But first, the tissue layers of the heart. So just like we saw with arteries and veins, the walls of the heart also have 3 layers. The endocardium is the innermost layer, and it's a very thin lining of epithelial cells, just like we saw, or we will see really in any body cavity. This reduces the friction of that constant pumping of the blood and helps it flow more smoothly through the heart, so it's not going to get caught up on anything. The thickest layer of the heart, the center layer, is called the myocardium. This is mostly made of cardiac muscle, and this is the contraction of the cardiac muscle tissue is what causes the heart to be able to pump blood. This is, of course, the only place in the whole body where we're going to find cardiac muscle tissue. So if you were asked what system or what part of the body uses cardiac muscle tissue, you would, of course, think, oh, the heart. And then our last layer is called the pericardium. And it is a very thick layer of fibrous connective tissue or dense connective tissue, and it's kind of a sac that surrounds the heart. The pericardium is not actually connected to the myocardium. So this pericardium, the layer of thick, dense connective tissue, is not physically connected to the myocardium. There's a space here in between, the pericardial space. And that space becomes really important for the functioning of the heart, because if this myocardium, that muscular layer of cardiac tissue, was restricted or connected to that dense layer of connective tissue, that would impact the ability of the tissue to contract, of that muscle tissue to act as a pump. So having that little bit of a space there keeps that the ability of that cardiac tissue to pump effectively. So always remember about that pericardial space. Okay, let's look at each of our individual circuits of the heart. The right pump is called the pulmonary circuit. Pulm means going to the lungs. So this is where deoxygenated blood or low oxygen blood is returning from the body back to the heart and is then going to be sent to the lungs to pick up oxygen. And we'll look at how that happens when we get to the respiratory system. But for now, we should know that the blood that's returning to the heart from the body, all that oxygen has been used up, and it now needs to go back to the lung to be reoxygenated and to pick up more oxygen. And it's going to enter the heart through the either superior, remember superior means above, or inferior vena cava. And those are the veins that are returning to the heart. So it's going to enter through either the superior vena cava or the inferior vena cava, either above or below the heart. And it's going to enter into the right atrium. Remember, the atria are the receiving chambers. So that blood is going to enter into the right atrium. It's going to travel down into the right ventricle. And the ventricle is the thing that is going to pump it out of the heart and into the pulmonary arteries. Arteries, remember, are carrying blood away from the heart. In this case, they're going to the lungs. And when they get to the lungs, they will pick up more oxygen and then be returned to the heart through the pulmonary vein. And they will enter the systemic circuit. And at that point, it's considered high oxygen blood because it is leaving the heart, and it's been, all those red blood cells have been loaded up with extra oxygen, and they're going to return to the heart through the pulmonary veins. So returning to the heart through the pulmonary veins, entering the left atrium, traveling through that valve down into the left ventricle, and pumped out through the aorta to re-enter to the systemic circuit, which are basically the series of blood vessels that travel through the rest of our body, carrying that high oxygen blood to all of our visceral organs and our muscle tissue so that we can fuel cellular respiration and getting energy, making ATP. Fairly important function, right? You've probably noticed that when I was talking about the right pump, I was indicating the left side of the heart in the image. And when I was talking about the left pump, I was indicating the right side of the heart in the image. That is because the images that we're looking at are in that standard anatomical position that you looked at in the lab last week. So when you're looking down at your own heart, the right pump would in fact be on the right-hand side of your body, and the left pump would be on the left-hand side of your body. But when we're looking at these diagrams, we're looking at it in standard anatomical position. So it's going to be flip-flopped. And then finally, we have our coronary arteries. So in all of this action of pumping blood through the heart, that layer of epithelial cells, the endocardium in the middle, that's preventing the tissues of the heart itself, that myocardium, from getting any oxygen from the actual blood moving through the heart, moving through the systemic circuit, or moving through the pulmonary circuit. So as blood is exiting the systemic circuit and traveling out the aorta, it will first be pumped, or some of it will first be pumped into the coronary arteries. So here's the aorta, and that blood is going to be exiting through the aorta, and as it does that, some will be supplied to the actual tissues of the heart, to that myocardial layer, through the coronary arteries. So the arteries of the heart, coronary arteries of the heart. So hopefully you could answer all of those takeaway questions. I'm going to cover chapter 6 in a third video, and we're going to review the cells of our blood.